Welcome Tim Clipsham, who's going to be talking today about a fairly, you're going to hit this fork in the road between AUI and Atlaskit and what I should do. Tim, you've been a vendor on the marketplace for a couple years now. You have a few apps up there, like Analytics for Confluence, Macro Toolbox, and Polls. And Tim's has been one of those vendors that we interact with a lot because he's Sydney-based. He comes to App Weeks, and we reach out to him for advice on certain things, like how to build really nice-looking apps. So, Tim, welcome, everyone. Please welcome Tim Clipsham.
Well, hi, everyone. As Neil said, I'm Tim. I'm very excited to be here to talk about AUI 7 and Atlaskit, because I think it's a really big question now, more than ever, about which framework to choose and how to navigate that decision. And so through my own journey in the Atlassian ecosystem, I've had to face this exact question about what to do with this and how to move our apps forward. Although I think the answer to this question is less about the frameworks and really more about what the needs of your customers and your business and your team are. And these can vary depending on whether you're looking at a new app or a growing app and what state those are currently in. And so I think the best way to really start this talk off is to begin with a story. The Big Bang Bonanza. And so I'm not talking about a Big Bang beginning, nor am I talking about the Big Bang Bazinga, although that might be fun too. I'm talking about a Big Bang change. Actually, out of interest, show of hands, has anybody experienced what they believe to be a Big Bang change? Is that anyone in the room? A big, large project? There's a few of you. So a few of you know my pain. That's good to know. Often this gets described as a change that's really large, where something's done all in one go. And I think that description lacks a little because, this morning I brushed my teeth and I did all that all in one go. That was a Big Bang experience and it went okay. Or our first app, for example, we built literally in a weekend and that was done all in one go and that was okay. And so I feel a more appropriate description of what a Big Bang change is something like this. A change that's larger than what your customer, team, or business can stomach. A change that starts to tear away the seams of what holds you together and keep you strong and effective. And so before I started on the Atlassian ecosystem in general, I worked at a really good company that I still love today. And they had a really high value on user experience, and not just for customers, but also for the employees and the team as well. And so they crafted this beautiful office space for us to work in and live in. And it really demonstrated the company's commitment to making sure that experience, whether it's internally for people or externally with customers, it was going to be good. But the funny thing about this is, while this amazing office space looks fantastic and was great to work in, when we looked at the product, there's a bit of juxtaposition happening there. It doesn't really match and align with the goals that we had, and we're offering out at the employees and the team. And so this product was over 8 years old at this point. It had been grown organically. Many of you have probably dealt with at some point in your career classic quirks mode. Is that anyone? Anyone remember that? The one large, 1,000-line CSS file. This is a result of that. And so devs aren't happy. It's really hard to change. Designers aren't happy either because as devs make changes, there's always something slightly misaligned, doesn't work right, and it's becoming more and more difficult to deliver the experience that our customers are demanding of us. And so, faced with this challenge, what do? Well, we decided to build our own AUI that we called ACE. And so, like AUI, it has a number of components. This is something that was heavily inspired by AUI. In fact, 2 of the people who originally helped design and build AUI were on the team. And so we put that together. It took maybe 6 to 12 months to get the base framework designed together. And so then we were faced with the challenge of how on earth do we take that into the product and make it a reality? And so I'm excited to say the team had the best idea ever. Let's reskin the entire product one for one in one go. What could go wrong? And so the developers went away, and they did some estimates and did a spike, and they said, you know what, it's going to take about 3 months. Well, okay, that's not too bad. But did I mention that 80% of the product was legacy code? And even furthermore, most of the team had never even worked with this code. And so I'm just like, well, what on earth could go wrong with this strategy? And frankly, a lot went wrong from the very first week. We started and we had about 120, somewhere there, pages to convert. And things weren't going so well. And by 6 months in, which, mind you, that's 3 months after the initial estimate, it had become a complete nightmare. Poor quality, the interfaces we were building, there were a lot of gaps. Some of the new interfaces we built were actually worse than the old ones to use. And so that resulted in designers being unhappy and an ever-growing backlog of work that developers had to pick up with no end in sight. Some of them being hired on the premise they'd work on new code, not old. And finger pointing, nobody wanted to own this mess. Support and sales had given up and stopped giving us product feedback. It's like, what do we do? Morale was low. I mean, the company really had lost hope. And it's in this dark place. Like, what on earth do we do with this? We didn't intend for this to happen. We started and we had best intentions and we planned for the best, but we didn't really assess the worst. And so we began to make the process more transparent. We began to set better expectations with the teams about what quality levels should be there to try and rein in the urge for both developers, designers, and product managers to want to perfect. And to make a really long story short, we got there. And we delivered a new experience that unified a number of patterns in the product and brought together a new look and feel that represented the brand we wanted to present to our customers to make it easier for them to use. And we did like an opt-in rollout and we got a majority uptake. It was a victory. Customers loved it. Our teams were able to then accelerate the way they built product. Everyone was happy. And so we celebrated, as you do, right? 1 glass of champagne for every single page in the product. It was a good time. But I'll never forget the words my manager said to me after this project that he wrote me in a card. These words have stuck with me and haunted me, frankly, for the last, 2 years of my life. And so it's in this context that I begin creating good software and our apps. And faced with this question of AUI 7 Atlaskit, is it one or the other? Is it both? I really like to propose it's less about which one or the other and more about how you come to that decision and about the needs that you have. And so today I want to walk through a few different things with you. Firstly, I'd like to look at the context of the space and what's going on in the front end. Secondly, I'd like to dig into new apps. Thirdly, growing apps. And then also look a little bit into the future and with what I think will happen next. Although I probably will be wrong, disclaimer. So, the many frameworks interpretation. Somehow, I've come to believe that our universe is particularly special in that we've inherited every JavaScript framework that's existed in any universe in our own. I don't know if anyone else feels the same. There's so many of them. And I think with the web and the original constraints, there's a lot of challenges we've been faced with over the last 10 years of development, both with the mobile and the growing complexity in the applications that we have. And so this is how I see the journey. I think, in my mind, it all starts with jQuery, maybe because that's what I started with in university, but back in those days, can you believe 10 years ago we were still building for IE6? That's crazy, right? jQuery, and before you know it, the mobile web came into existence with the iPhone coming out around 2008, and so that began to take off. And so to deal with growing complexity of platforms and the expectations of our customers, we saw some new generation frameworks come out. For example, AngularJS, Ember.js. And so this really took the pattern of the classic the server-side render and the client-side DOM manipulation pattern. It shifted that into a client-side render where your data was pulled by an API. And from here, things continued to evolve. We got tablets. And the expectations again began to change and evolve. Also, I think these frameworks that we had, while they're really good and actually pretty powerful, if you're trying to move an existing product to them, it could be quite difficult at times as well. And this is where I see the next hop in the pattern that was used in these frameworks, where we see frameworks like React that take a more reactive approach, where it's easier to reason about how your application works, and frankly, a little bit easier to test as well. And so it's in this place that we see AUI, and Atlaskit take their place. AUI in 2009, born in the era where the classic server-side render pattern was still quite prominent. And then Atlaskit on the far right in 2016, in the reactive world of programming, built exclusively to work with React. And just to be sure I cover my bases, I want to just lightly touch on each of these libraries in a little more detail, because I realize this is an advanced stream. You guys have probably looked at them. But with AUI, known as Atlassian User Interface, or AUI, which I think Daz mentioned it's called AUI because it hurts to use, but a show of hands, who's actually building apps today using AUI? Cool, most of you, that's not a surprise. Me too. Early in Atlassian's history, AUI was born, and it really was built in an era of monolithic frameworks and tools. And my opinion, I don't really think it's necessarily bad or necessarily good. It just is what it is. It's got some advantages, it's got some disadvantages, and so you really need to choose do those align with the goal that you have. And so it's been on a journey too, frankly, 10 years. I mean, that's a long time. So I thought I'd give you a little history lesson as well for fun. So this is AUI 3. And I think the best way to show a framework is to look at buttons. Buttons seem to really represent the different patterns and trends in design across time. So actually, AUI 3 doesn't even have a button. There is no button in this library. It wasn't until AUI 4 that we got buttons embedded instead. AUI 4, we have buttons. AUI 5, that classic gradient look. Does anyone remember that look? That's come and gone. And then from there, AUI 5 to AUI 6. If it comes up, here we go. Flat, the flat interface pattern. That's pretty popular. And then most recently, AUI 7, which frankly, Daz from the team has done some pretty impressive work here and has brought the Atlassian Design Guidelines 3 to life. So that's AUI, Atlaskit. Again, we know what Atlaskit is. It's built on React. It makes it really easy to build great user experiences in the Atlassian product suite. Again, I don't think Atlaskit is necessarily good or necessarily bad. It just has a different set of advantages and disadvantages that may or may not align with the goals that you have for your team and also for your customers. In fact, if you like React, you can even use AUI on React as well. Although I would say from my experience, it wasn't as easy as Atlaskit to get started. And again, because of the button trend, I thought I'd show another button. And this highlights one of the greatest things I found about Atlaskit is that everything's modular, so you really can just include just the pieces you need. So that means that your bundle that you're sending to the web browser is smaller, which results in a better user experience in terms of that first load. But it also allows you to mix and match and pull just the bits in that you need. And so if we stack these up, AUI 7 and Atlaskit. AUI 7 is evolving toward ADG3. It's a monolith library for now. I gather in AUI 8 they're looking to begin to pull that apart, which is an exciting change. It works with any framework, and I think that's really powerful to know. If you want to use something else like Angular, it might be a good fit for you to wrap these components in and use them instead. It requires minimal build tooling. You don't really need to get the Webpack, Babel, etc., all into your build pipeline, allowing you to keep your apps pretty simple, particularly if it's a very small, simple app or a very small piece of functionality. It keeps it quite lightweight. And lastly, if you want to customize anything, you typically use the CSS that you either love or hate. Hate, personally. Atlaskit, it aligns best with the ADG3. It's modular where you can pick and choose, as we said before. However, it does require React, which I like React actually, but not everybody does, and so that's a constraint that you need to weigh up when choosing one framework or the other. It's best with the complex build tools like Webpack and gives you a lot of power to build a really modular and well-structured application. And if you want to customize it, you're really best to look at the theming components or considering forking a component to make any changes. So a little bit more work than, say, adding a bit of CSS, but it's probably a good thing anyway, frankly, to do that and to track your changes that way. And lastly, a dash of animation. Oh, gee, okay. So faced with this, what do? Licensing as well is another concern that you need to keep in your mind because AUI 7 has the Atlassian license, whereas Atlaskit has the Apache 2 on most components, except for the theming and styling. That might also impact your choice as well. But with this, how do you best move your apps forward? How do you best approach going through to either evolve your existing app or take a new app to the next level? Is it AUI? Is that Atlaskit? I like to propose something different to you. I think it's less about one or the other and picking one, and more about what the right tool is for you. It's really about looking to try and make good decisions, rather than just the one we might personally prefer or prefer to work with. And so I think this can differ whether you're working on a new or existing app. And so the next step for us today is to really look at what do good decisions look like for a new app versus an existing one. So for new apps, out of interest, who in the room is actually working on a new app currently? Show of hands. Cool, there's a few of you. Anybody else planning to work on one in the next 6 to 12 months? Yep. So this was my first experience. It's very vivid in my mind. Going back to the story, after we delivered in my previous workplace this new interface, it wasn't long after that I started building stuff for the Atlassian marketplace. And building a business on the side, I mean, some of you in the room would know, it's hard. You're really, really time poor. And knowing myself, there's a quality that had really inhibited my ability to deliver on this for the last 5, 10 years of my life. And I think some of you in the room might connect with this. And so the greatest temptation I had as a front-end developer was this one. Does anybody else connect with that? Am I the only one? I just get sucked in by the new and shiny. So I had failed so many times before trying to build new tools and frameworks. And so knowing this, I thought, okay, if I'm going to embark on this Atlassian marketplace journey, what's within my control to make sure I make good decisions for this new app to actually get something shipped? And so I set myself a rule. I said, Tim, you're only allowed to adopt at most one new critical tool. And so, for example, in our first app, that new critical tool was just the fact that the non-critical tool was actually product analytics, which I hadn't worked with before. But I used all the existing tools that were available, like Atlassian Connect Express. I used AUI version 5 at the time. And in a weekend, managed to get my first app built. And then with another week or so of getting the marketing material together, we got it live on the marketplace. And people started buying it. And it's like, wow, crazy. So the principle that I draw from this is really this. I think we need to focus on the tools we need, not necessarily the ones we want. And I know as a front-end developer, that sometimes for me is personally challenging because new and shiny, I want to work with something new. I love learning. But when it comes to starting a business, particularly a marketplace business, I think this is a really important fact to consider. In fact, I wasn't first to come up with this. My old CTO, actually, he had a principle that he used to drill into us, which is to leverage the tools you already know. That doesn't mean you don't learn something new. It doesn't mean you neglect the tools you know. It means the ones you know are much faster to get going with. It means you're able to get an actual result for a customer and frankly, get validation that your idea even matters in the first place, because there's no point building a product perfectly to find out that nobody actually has the problem that you've tried to solve. The other thing that came to mind with this topic is to encourage people to go with the grain. And that's an analogy taking woodwork, where with wood you've got a grain, and as you work along the grain, your actions are more effective. And so what does this mean in tech? It means, let's say you really like Angular or Vue or something like that. Atlassian support and build for React. And so by choosing something they already support and build for, you get a lot of leverage of scale and you get to stand on the shoulders of giants to move your app forward faster. And so that doesn't mean you shouldn't choose something that goes against the grain. You really need to think about, are you innovating by your solution for your customer, or are you looking to innovate in your method? And you can do both, but it comes with a cost. And so good questions to think about as you're starting a new app is, will your method truly impact your customer's preference for your product? And from a business perspective, will it influence a buying decision? And will it impact your ability to attract and retain great talent in your team? It might. And it might be something you need to think about. For example, automation for Jira, made by CodeBarrel, they did some stuff that went against the grain using Lambda and the tooling when they could have picked Atlassian Connect Express, for example. But for them and the scale that they've grown to, that was a really good decision, even though it went against the grain. For myself, as a sole developer working another job, being able to leverage all the tools Atlassian gave meant I was able to build something and then make that step to get out of the business that I was working in to work for myself and to start the journey we're on now. But I do have one regret. We didn't adopt any good type checkers early, and in retrospect, I wish we did, because type checkers like Flow, TypeScript, even something like ESLint are really, really easy to get into your build pipeline, and they add a lot of value and make it easier to ensure that you're shipping good code. That's definitely something I'd recommend to consider for your next project. So that's for new apps. What about growing apps? Out of interest, how many in the room are working actively on existing products? Is that most of you? Actually, it seems to be less of you than new apps. That's crazy. But back to the story. I think trying to update existing apps feels a bit like this. You try and make a large change, and everything just has to go right. But not only that, you have to be able to roll back if anything goes wrong. And so with our 3 apps that we had, it wasn't too long after that I quit my job and I was working on this full time, and then this happened. ADG3 and an emoji that didn't work. 2017. So that was a big year, and we were faced with, how do we tackle this problem? It's what I actually call an ecosystem shift. We're building apps on an ecosystem, on a platform, and so sometimes the ecosystem underneath shifts and you have to deal with that. For example, right now, the GDPR changes that we're dealing with, that requires us to update our usage of APIs when we're dealing with personal identifiable information. That's also an ecosystem shift. And so at the time, I'm like, okay, Atlaskit or AUI 7, what should we do? But hold on a second. There was no AUI version 7 at that time. I'm like, crap, what do we do? How do we navigate this change? At the same time, we're trying to build our product for on-premise server as well, for ready in time for the next summit. So faced with this challenge in our apps, we had one of our apps built on AUI version 5 with jQuery. We had the other with the same stack. And our most recent and main app that was a little bit bigger and more complex, we had adopted React in the tooling. And so faced with this, it was a very hard decision about how to move forward and ensure that we're ready to launch our app on ADG3 at the same time that Confluence Cloud was. And I guess, as I said before, this thought continued to haunt me through this decision process. Because the idea of moving to Atlaskit, whilst trying to do everything else as a solo developer on this business, was daunting, and I knew it was probably going to kill us. And so I want to propose this: to prefer evolution over revolution, to try and find a way to evolve to the next stage rather than make a radical change in one go. And so for us, I'm actually a little bit ashamed to say this, so forgive me if you think this is terrible, because I think it's terrible. The way that we did this is we did ADG3 CSS overrides, and they are horrible. They're really bad. They're like, there's no, yeah, shame. Bring the shame. It's definitely real. But in saying all that, we did this approach, and in 2 days from inception to reality, we had this shift in our product. And the before and after, in 2 days. Ideal change? Absolutely not. But did it get us to the next stage and allow us to continue growing? Sure. Because you'd be right to say, yeah, Tim, you brought on some technical debt, and you'd be right to say that. That is true. But I don't think technical debt is something to avoid. It's something to manage. A bit like financial debt to grow a company. And so, fortunately, it wasn't long after that Atlassian shipped AUI version 7 anyway. And so actually, the hacks that were there to do that, it was like maybe a 100-line CSS file. They're all gone today. They've all been removed with very little effort. So that was a really great change. But in saying that, it's important to consider that what got you here may not get you there. And so for us, with our analytics app, that's how I feel. I think AUI version 7 has got us to the point now where we've grown our team and we're expanding and working hard on it. But the experience we want to offer to our customers, it's not delivering on. Atlaskit, even just with small things like a little bit of animation that softens the feel in the app, that's where we really want to go. And so faced with that, we still want to take the approach of evolution over revolution. So how can you do that? If you're in the room and you're looking to move from AUI to Atlaskit, what options do you have? There's 3 in my mind that I think can be particularly helpful in this circumstance. The first is actually Big Bang. As much as I've said, avoid that. Because if you have a really small app, it might actually be a viable strategy for you. For example, our first app's pretty small. We probably could do this if we wanted to. But the devil really is in the details. If there's a lot of necessary complexity behind the simplest interfaces that you see. So I'd highly recommend, if you're going to consider doing a change in one go, definitely dig deep, do a spike or 2, get your dev team to jump in and have a look and figure out exactly what might be involved. Maybe even test converting a piece or 2 independently and see how long it takes you. But then rather than putting on rose-tinted glasses, make sure you consider the worst case as well. The option I think that works better is this one, which is look at your app and find the seams. And what you can do is you can take principles from the microservices thinking that you see on the back end and apply it to the front end. So as an example, many of you would know the content byline and the inline dialog pattern. So here, for example, that for us is one micro web app, completely standalone. This is a general page. It too is a micro app, completely standalone. And because 3 makes a good point, I thought I'd do a third as well inside Space Tools and Confluence. This also is yet another micro web app. And so the way we've done that is using tools like Webpack, where you can create multiple entry points. And that will then allow us to share JavaScript code between these different apps, but it will build them into separate independent JavaScript files to be delivered. Learning how to use Webpack is a whole talk in itself, so I'm not going to detail today about how to do that, particularly with you guys who are in an advanced stream. But Webpack version 4 is definitely worth considering as a means to achieve this result, although I'm sure there's many other methods that I'd be keen to hear about what you guys are doing as well after the talk. The last one is also a little bit shameful, but it also might be it's also very highly pragmatic. And so you can technically actually put Atlaskit inside AUI. Don't really recommend it, but you can. And we've been doing this on our journey to evolve. It allows you to handpick specific components that you need rather than moving everything over in one go. So as an example, this here is, our app is currently built in AUI version 7. And inside that, we had an old table that wasn't working anymore. The component got left behind, which sometimes happens in the open source community. So we needed to switch out a table for a new module. And because we wanted to move to Atlaskit, I thought, well, hey, maybe we could try putting the dynamic table module from Atlaskit into our page, so we don't have to rewrite the whole thing to get this one improvement out for our customers. And sure enough, it worked. We placed the Atlaskit dynamic table inside AUI. And the code's relatively simple. This is a contrived example, but it shows you are able in React to actually do things like this. Is it perfect? Absolutely not. Is it ideal? Definitely not. But it might be that one step that allows you to head in the right direction toward the framework of choice, whether it be toward Atlaskit or toward AUI. We currently share our interface as well between cloud and server, which again is learning how to do that as a whole talk in itself. And there's been many people in the audience here and in the Atlassian ecosystem that have taken steps to share that. So if you're interested in learning how to share your interface between server and cloud, I've put together a little GitHub gist that outlines some of the existing talks, repos, and example code that you can use to try and do the same thing. This is something we've done. I'd be more than happy to talk to you more about it after the talk. So if you have any questions, write them down and come and ask me. And if I don't have the answer, I can probably refer you to someone who does. So what's next? What is the future? Well, the one thing for sure is that whatever I think it is, I'm probably wrong. But I'm going to have a go anyway, because why not, right? So if we come back to the context of the front-end journey, what does this look like? I think there's a couple things that are important here. Industry-wise, I believe the reactive programming techniques are here to stay a while, a bit like how the jQuery ones are here to stay a while. There's a lot of investment across the industry as a whole in tools like React. Atlassian themselves, for example, are heavily investing in React. So I think React is a pretty safe choice for your new application today and to invest for your existing one. AUI as well, for example, is, in some ways, it's, without AUI being upgraded, it would really hold back the future of Atlaskit because you'd have these old and new experiences in conflict together in the same interface. And so, from my perspective, I think AUI is also a pretty safe bet to keep going for the future because the Atlassian products, Confluence, Jira, etc., need it to continue moving forward. I think the pace of change is going to continue to grow, though. I think Atlaskit's going to continue to be invested in, both by the community and by Atlassian. So if you're making a choice for a new app, AUI or Atlaskit, why not both? One or the other can definitely work for you. Maybe some of your old apps would benefit from staying in AUI. Maybe they're more in maintenance mode. Maybe some of your new ones could benefit from the improvements in Atlaskit. Definitely consider both when you go forward and look at what your next application should look like. And so, to recap, good decisions for new apps. Definitely watch out for that new and shiny effect. It definitely affects me to this day. Consider doing something like adopting only one new critical tool. Come up with some life hacks to hold yourself accountable to the goals that you have. Really consider the tools you need, not necessarily the ones that you want. And leverage what you know And where you can, where it makes sense, as much as you can, go with the grain. Leverage the work that others have done before you. Don't forget too, those JS type checkers, highly recommended, definitely worth considering for your next project. For growing apps, remember this one. It probably won't haunt you as much as it haunts me. But where you can, prefer evolution over revolution. Find ways to continue to deliver value to your customers today, but in a way where you're not compromising the future of your ability to deliver later. Because what got you here may not got you there. You may need to rethink your future strategy and moving forward. That's me. That's AUI 7 Atlaskit. If there's time for questions, I'd love to answer any. But thank you so much for being here. I'd love to talk to you after about how you're moving your apps forward.
Awesome, thanks, Tim. Does anyone have any questions for Tim? Is anyone on this journey right now of trying to consider make a change between AUI and Atlaskit? No, no one is conflicted here. Yeah.
Not a question really, but how long was the journey? Just to, I'm not sure if I get the picture correctly. If you moved completely by now. But what are the experiences? How long did it take? How long was it to add a new tool for the developers, for the product? Were there any conflicts between the frameworks that you have to face with? I mean technically, so you adding a new framework, caused it any problems with the existing ones? So what are these experiences?
Sure. So, time-wise, when we started with AUI, we were using, for one of our applications, we were already using React at that point. So we had to wrap each of those components ourselves. And that took some time, because some of the components, like naturally they're built to manipulate the DOM in an uncontrolled way, which within the React world doesn't work particularly well. So challenges we had to face was how to really bubble wrap those so that they wouldn't break the consistency of the DOM that React knew and understood. So that's one thing to watch out for. I know there is a library, I think from Atlassian, that wraps those components now for you, so I definitely recommend picking that up. I know at the time for us, there was like version 0.0.1 or something, so we had to actually build our own. But the date picker, that was hard. There was another component as well. I think the drop downs, getting them to appear when you click a button, that was a bit tricky as well. So you would definitely have challenges wrapping them yourself if you need to do so. With Atlaskit, it's been pretty painless. It's built for React, so I guess it's no surprise. We're gradually adopting Atlaskit into our app. So the dynamic table is one example. We've started bringing in the tooltips. I'm sure the drop downs and other experiences will come through very soon as well. Because our app is split into separate mini apps, so we're developing a new welcome experience for our on-premise version, and so that's a whole Atlaskit from the ground up page. So in that case, we'll have maybe four out of 5 pages in our product still using AUI, but using Webpack and entry points, we'll have that one by itself. And in terms of time, the most time for using Atlaskit was just learning how to set up that base page. And I didn't find that as easy I didn't find a good example. I could just copy and paste. I had to fiddle around a bit to figure out how the theming and stuff worked. But for everybody else I've spoken to, Atlaskit's getting better and better every week. Does that answer your question? Yep. At the time when I was doing the initial parts, it was just me. Now we're a team of 3, almost 4, and so that now we're doing both as much as we can. We'll make sure that we're prioritizing some customer feature work as well as ongoing improvements to the app, whether it be for us and build tooling to make sure we're not making mistakes, or whether it be paying off any technical debt we've incurred. We're trying to balance both at the same time.
Thank you for the presentation. And my question, just a backstory. A couple of years ago, during CodeGaze 2016, we have created, so we started adopting React, and we created a status app which runs, shares absolutely the same code between Jira Server and Jira Cloud. And it based. We used React with a combination of AUA, and at that time it worked perfectly, and it still does. But the Jira Cloud UI was like similar to Jira Server. Right now, with when Atlaskit is adopted in the Jira new UI, we have our app running on server, and it looks natively to Jira Server interface. However, in Jira Cloud, we still using AUI. So my question is, challenge is, do we need to have now? So we have a shared code, front end code between. Now, do we need to like rewrite the code for Jira Cloud so that it looks natively to Jira Cloud interface? And so my understanding, we have to have two separate like repos to Jira Server UI and Jira Cloud UI. That's the whole idea of these UI libraries to create apps that looks natively to the platform. See, what's your comments? How you solve these challenges? What? Yeah.
That's a really good
Thanks.
question. I think it depends on a couple of things. It depends how much of the libraries you make use of in your product and how disjointed that feels, because that can be on a scale of very similar to, very not similar and messy. I think it's a question of your customers too and what they're like, what type of experience do they expect. So, I mean, if it was me, I'd be speaking to customers, getting feedback from them on how they think the experience looks, maybe having some sort of in-product feedback as well where they can give it. And if you're not getting any feedback about it, maybe it's not a large problem yet. Because I guess in the context of the business, it might be that it's sufficient